There are moments that happen in silence. No cameras, no breaking news alerts, no carefully worded press releases. Just a young person, alone with something they've discovered about themselves, holding it close before the world gets a chance to take it apart. And then somehow the world always finds out. She was just a girl in a studio, moving, breathing through something she couldn't put into words yet. When Shiloh Jolie-Pitt first found her way to dance, she wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't building a brand or following a path someone had laid out for her. She was simply moving through music the way certain people do when they've finally found the one place where they feel completely, honestly themselves. Nobody was watching. And that, strangely, is exactly why what came next hit so many people so hard. Because when the world did finally see her, really see her, it wasn't what anyone expected. This wasn't a scandal. Nobody did anything wrong. But what unfolded quietly, over years, inside one of the most watched families on Earth, turned out to say something much deeper than any headline could hold. It said something about identity, about survival, about what it means to find yourself when everyone around you is too busy deciding who you are. And it said something about Angelina Jolie, a woman who has been written about, analyzed, celebrated, condemned, and misunderstood for most of her adult life. That none of the stories ever quite managed to capture. Here is the part that genuinely surprised people. Shiloh didn't just discover dance, she discovered herself. And in doing that, in finding something so completely her own, and holding onto it through years of real pain and public chaos, she held up a mirror to her mother. A mirror that reflected something raw, something unfinished, something Angelina had been quietly carrying for a very long time without ever finding the right way to name it. What came next wasn't a red carpet moment. It wasn't a prepared statement or a carefully timed interview. It was something far more complicated and far more real than any of that. It was a mother watching her child become a whole person, and in the watching, slowly, privately, beginning to ask herself what she had become. That is where this story actually begins. To understand it fully, you have to go back further than most people are willing to look. Angelina Jolie was not supposed to be the kind of mother she became. That sounds like a strange thing to say about someone so publicly devoted to her children, but it's true, and it matters. She grew up inside Hollywood royalty, the daughter of Jon Voight, surrounded by a world that rewarded image over honesty, performance over depth. As a young woman, she was brilliant and restless, and almost impossible to put in a box. She wore her pain on the outside at a time when women in her position were expected to keep it hidden, keep it polished, keep it managed. She told uncomfortable truths in interviews. She covered herself in tattoos that meant something to her. She adopted her first child, Maddox, before most of her peers were even thinking seriously about parenthood. She built a life that looked nothing like what anyone imagined for someone with her name, her face, and her particular kind of fame. And then came Brad Pitt. And for a while, their life together looked like something neither of them could have scripted. Beautiful and global and enormous. 6 children connected across continents, carrying different origins and different beginnings, gathered under the same roof and somehow becoming a family that looked, at least from the outside, like something real and intentional and built to last. Shiloh Jolie-Pitt came into the world in Namibia in 2006. She was their first biological child together. And from her very first days, she carried a weight that no infant should ever have to carry. The first photographs of her reportedly sold for over $4 million. She had not yet been alive for a full week. Growing up inside that level of visibility does something to a person. It has to. But the thing that most people watching from a safe distance never quite understood is that being seen and being known are not the same thing. Not even close. The world could see Shiloh. It watched her grow up in airport terminals and on red carpets and through paparazzi lenses. It commented on her clothing, her haircut, her expression. But none of that meant the world knew her. It just meant the world had opinions about her. From very early on, Angelina described her daughter in ways that stood out. Not because of what she said about Shiloh's appearance or her future, but because of how clearly she seemed to actually see her child as a separate, complete person. Shiloh had a strong sense of herself from a young age, Angelina said. She preferred clothing associated with boys. She asked for a period to be called John. And Angelina talked about this simply, without drama, without careful qualification. She treated it as something that was just true about her daughter, the way other parents talk about a child who loves music or hates mornings. That honesty was unusual. Not because of the subject itself, but because of the absence of performance around it. No spin, no managed messaging, just a mother describing her child as she actually was. Beneath all of that, though, something was quietly building, something that would take years and a great deal of pain to fully reach the surface. For a long stretch of time, the life the Jolie-Pitt family lived appeared to be held together by genuine intention. It was unconventional in almost every way, but it didn't look fragile. Private schools, long stretches in different countries, children raised with an awareness of the world beyond themselves. Angelina was the one who appeared most consistently present in the daily texture of it. She brought the children to her film sets. She talked about each of them in interviews with a specificity and care that felt real, not rehearsed. She described Zahara's quiet strength, Pax's emotional sensitivity, Maddox's fierce independence, and Shiloh's particular kind of certainty about herself. A certainty that seemed to come from somewhere deep rather than somewhere performed. Brad was present too, by most accounts, but Angelina was the constant, the one who seemed to anchor the whole thing. The children were close in ways that went beyond their different origins. Adopted and biological, from Cambodia, Ethiopia, Vietnam, Namibia, different beginnings that somehow added up to a shared life, a real unit, and for a long time that unit felt solid. Shiloh was growing up right in the middle of all of it. She had siblings older and younger. She had parents whose faces were two of the most recognized on the planet. She had a name that strangers felt comfortable using as if they knew her. And she had an inner world that almost nobody outside her immediate family was ever allowed to actually see. She was drawn to movement early, to dance specifically. But not in the way that children of wealthy, ambitious parents are often directed towards structured activities as a form of enrichment or resume building. This was something she found herself. Something quieter and more personal than that. She wasn't performing. She was working something out. People who knew her during those years described her as thoughtful. As someone who watched more than she spoke. Who paid attention in the way that people do when they are genuinely curious about the world, rather than simply waiting for their turn to be noticed. She didn't perform for the people around her. Given where she came from, given the atmosphere she had grown up breathing, that quality was more remarkable than it might sound. Angelina watched her. Tried the way parents always try, to see past the projections and the noise and the expectations, to see who her child actually was underneath all of it. And what she was beginning to find was someone who didn't seem to need shaping, someone who was already, quietly and steadily, doing that work for themselves. Then the ground shifted. The shift didn't arrive with a single moment. Real change rarely does, even in families that live their lives partly in public. It arrived slowly, then all at once, in the way that fractures often work. What happened first was private, a separation. Then something far messier and far more public than either of them had perhaps anticipated. In 2016, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's relationship ended. According to reports, it ended painfully. There were allegations, legal proceedings, statements from representatives, counter-statements. There was a level of public scrutiny applied to a private family collapse that would have been almost impossible for anyone to endure with grace, let alone a family with 6 children. All of them old enough to feel it, if not yet old enough to fully understand it. Angelina filed for divorce. The specific details of what led to that decision have been disputed across years of coverage, and in many important ways they remain unresolved. What is not in dispute is what came after. A custody battle that stretched on far longer than anyone could have expected, one that, by all accounts, left marks on everyone it touched in ways that were never fully visible from the outside. Shiloh was 10 years old when her parents separated. That age matters. Not because children at any age escape the pain of a family coming apart, because they don't. But because 10 is a particular kind of age, old enough to understand what is happening, not yet old enough to know what to do with that understanding. 10 is the age where things settle into you before you have any real way of processing them, where you absorb what's happening around you like weather, quietly, without being able to name it. Shiloh absorbed it quietly. She didn't become the visible casualty of the divorce the way some children of famous parents do, their names appearing in legal documents and interview transcripts as evidence rather than as people. She didn't make public statements, she didn't perform her pain for anyone, she kept dancing. According to people close to the family, the dance studio became something essential for her during this period. Not an escape exactly, though it probably served that function sometimes. More like a fixed point, a place where none of the noise outside could follow her in. Where she was simply a body moving through music, measuring herself against something real and honest. something that had nothing to do with who her parents were, or what was happening in courtrooms and tabloids and comment sections. Angelina saw this, and according to later accounts, she supported it with an intensity that went beyond ordinary parental encouragement. She understood, it seems, that this thing her daughter had found was not something to be managed or monetized or redirected. It was something to be protected. Then, around 2022, the world caught up. Videos began appearing online. Not produced content, not polished media moments arranged for maximum impact. Just footage from performances, from showcases, from ordinary dance events where Shiloh happened to be one of the participants doing something extraordinary. The videos spread the way things spread now, instantly across every platform. Picked up by entertainment sites and fan accounts, and people who had no particular interest in celebrity culture but found themselves watching anyway. What people saw surprised them. She was genuinely good, not good in the way that money and access and the best training available can make anyone appear competent. Good in a way that comes from somewhere inside, from a real connection between the music and the body, from something that can't be drilled into a person through technique alone. She had presence. The kind that makes you stop scrolling and just watch. People who had spent years seeing Shiloh only through paparazzi photographs, at airports, on red carpets, standing beside parents whose fame made her almost invisible despite being entirely visible, suddenly saw something entirely different. A young woman with a real skill, a real identity that had nothing to do with who gave birth to her or who raised her or what her last name meant to the rest of the world. The response was mostly wonder. Some of it carried the particular fascination that attaches to children of famous people when they show signs of their own talent, as if the proximity to greatness makes the talent more interesting. But a larger part of the reaction was simpler and more genuine than that. People were moved. They left comments about her confidence, her joy, the way it was obvious she was doing something she had chosen. There was something in watching her that felt unexpectedly emotional, even for people who couldn't quite explain why. Angelina, during all of this, stayed quiet. She didn't rush to amplify the attention or position herself within it. She didn't give the immediate proud mother interview that the moment seemed to be inviting. She let her daughter's moment exist without inserting herself into it. For someone as experienced with media as Angelina Jolie, that restraint felt deliberate. It felt like a choice made carefully and for reasons that mattered. But behind the silence, something was clearly moving. When Angelina did begin to speak, it wasn't in the way people expected. She didn't catalog Shiloh's achievements or project her future. She talked about watching. About what it feels like to observe your child step into who they actually are. To witness that process without being able to control it or predict it or take any real credit for it. She spoke about it with a kind of quiet awe that seemed entirely unperformed. And then she said something that landed differently than anything she had said publicly in years. She talked about identity, about the specific difficulty of knowing yourself when the world has spent decades deciding who you are. She talked about the long process of being interpreted and categorized and turned into a version of herself that belonged more to other people's imaginations than to any reality she had actually lived. She talked carefully and without self-pity about what that process had taken from her. Not career, not relationships, something more interior than either of those things. Something closer to the center. It wasn't a breakdown, it wasn't a confession, she was far too composed for either. But it was honest in a way that felt rare for her, and in the middle of it. The line between what she was saying about her daughter and what she was saying about herself became almost impossible to find. Her daughter had found something genuinely hers in the middle of enormous noise. Had held on to it through years of disruption and transition, and the particular difficulty of growing up with your face already famous before you'd figured out what your face meant to you. And had come through it not performing an identity, but actually living inside one. That, it seemed, was what Angelina had spent most of her life reaching for without ever quite getting there. According to people close to her, the years of legal battles had been more damaging than most people understood. The custody process, the scrutiny applied to her role as a mother, the feeling of having the most important work of her life reduced to evidence in a legal proceeding, had worn on her deeply in ways that her public composure never fully revealed. Watching Shiloh dance, according to more than one account, had genuinely given something back to her, something she hadn't fully realized she had lost. None of this resolves simply. It would be dishonest to suggest otherwise. Shiloh is 18 now, a legal adult. she made news again recently through a quiet legal act. According to reports, she filed paperwork to remove her father's surname. There was no statement attached to it, no press release, no interview time to the moment. It was a private decision that became public the way private decisions always do, when the person making them already has a famous name. And it was met with the kind of complicated reaction that anything involving this family tends to generate. Some people read it as a statement about the divorce. Some read it as a symbol of something larger. Some placed it inside the ongoing narrative of her parents' legal battles and used it accordingly. But the people who seemed most likely to actually understand it described it simply as a young woman deciding, for herself, what name she wanted to carry through her life. And that is the thing this entire story keeps returning to. Shiloh grew up where extraordinary privilege and extraordinary disruption intersected directly. She had access and opportunity and resources that most people will never come close to. She also had her childhood parsed and discussed by strangers, her identity speculated about in comment sections, her family's most painful private moments turned into public entertainment. She had all of that, and she still found something true about herself and held on to it. The dancing, the quiet choices, the name, all of it suggests someone who did real internal work. Someone who figured out, through years of noise and difficulty, what actually belonged to her and what belonged to everyone else's idea of her. Angelina has continued to speak about this period carefully. She has not offered resolution. She has not packaged the experience into something clean and inspiring. She has simply described, across various conversations over several years, what it has been like to be a mother in circumstances that were never simple and never easy. She has said more than once that her children show her things about herself that she couldn't reach any other way, that they are, in her words, her clearest mirror. When you look at Shiloh, at the discipline she developed, and the self-possession she carries and the willingness to make real choices quietly and let them stand without performance, you begin to understand exactly what her mother means by that. There is something worth staying with at the end of all of this, something that doesn't wrap up cleanly and doesn't need to. A child is born into the most watched family in the world. She finds a studio, she finds a rhythm, she finds a form of movement that belongs entirely to her that nobody gave her and nobody can take away from her. She carries it through years of real upheaval. She comes out the other side knowing something about herself that no amount of fame or money or external attention could ever have given her. She knows it because she built it herself in quiet, over time, through work. And her mother, one of the most examined women of her generation, a woman who has been called extraordinary and dangerous and broken and iconic, often by the same people in the same breath, watches this happen and finds in it something she recognizes, something she has been looking for without always knowing that's what she was doing. That recognition is not a small thing. It might actually be the most human thing in this entire story. We spend enormous amounts of time looking at people like Angelina Jolie and Shiloh Jolie-Pitt through whatever lens is most convenient. The famous marriage that fell apart, the custody battle, the Hollywood name, the dance videos, the name change. Each of these things gets turned into a symbol, a piece of evidence in some larger argument about fame and family and the way the world works. But underneath all of the symbols there are simply two people, a mother and a daughter, trying each in their own way to figure out who they are, doing it separately, doing it together. Doing it in the complicated, overlapping, imperfect way that parents and children always try to do it, regardless of how famous their names happen to be. Shiloh found something true about herself when she was young, and she held on to it when holding on must have been genuinely difficult. That is not a footnote in a celebrity story. That is the story. That is the whole thing, and Angelina, watching, seems to have arrived somewhere she couldn't have planned her way to. At the understanding that identity isn't something you protect through carefully managed image. It's something you return to again and again, especially when everything around you is pulling you somewhere else. It's something you choose quietly in the moments when no one is watching. Shiloh kept returning to the studio. Angelina kept returning to her children. And somewhere in that repetition, in those quiet returns to what is real over what is expected, there is something that has very little to do with celebrity and everything to do with what it actually costs to know yourself. To stay yourself, to choose yourself not once but over and over for as long as it takes. That story is still unfolding. It will be for a long time. But what we can already see of it is worth something. It is worth paying attention to. And it is worth telling carefully, because the people at the center of it are real and the questions it raises about identity and motherhood and survival and what we pass on to the people we love belong to all of us, not just to them. If something in this story stayed with you, a moment, a detail, something that reminded you of a feeling you've had before, share it in the comments below. These stories matter because they reach something true, even when they happen to people we only know from a distance. If you want more storytelling like this, told with patience and care and without the noise, subscribe and stay with us. There is always more worth telling, and we will keep telling it.